Morant with a running start. Elevates. Oh, it dunks. Oh, my goodness.
Tie game in overtime. Gasol will turn his heat. It's gone. Memphis on top. 7-10 remaining. Conley now with three. Count it. A 15-point lead for Memphis. And Blake Griffin gets into it on the floor with Randolph. Hard to tell if there are any punches being thrown under there, but Griffin took acceptance.
Adams going long. Morant. He hit it. John Morant. Insanity.
You gotta be kidding me.
Welcome to Grits and Grinds, a Memphis Grizzlies podcast. Grizzlies win edition. My name is Keith Parrish. Hope everybody is doing well. Sorry for the delayed episode release. I've been sick, and if you live in Tennessee, where most of my listeners are, or a majority are, we're under some snow days. The kids are home. Very frigid temperatures outside. So on this episode, a little bit late, but I've got a lot to go over. There, of course, was the win. This is a Grizzlies win episode because of the victory on MLK Day, a unbelievable game from the Grizzlies / Hustle, where Vince Williams Jr., Gigi Jackson, and Jacob Gilyard all made massive fourth quarter plays to defeat the Golden State Warriors. We also have to at least mention the games against the Clippers and the Knicks. And then since the last time I podcasted, we got a bunch of injuries and injury news. Desmond Bane is out, and we now know for how long. And then the Grizzlies added a player. So there is a lot to get to before we get there. Just a reminder, if you wanted to hear my opinions over the past 5 days while there was no episode, well, you could have gotten them if you were part of the Patreon community. I was still active in the Patreon Slack talking about the Grizzlies. So if you want that extra interaction with me and other Grizzlies fans, do it at patreon.com/fastbreakbreakfast. You can support the creation of this show over there and join the Grits and Grinds Slack channel and get my immediate reaction to everything. All right. Let's start big picture before getting to the win. Let's start big picture with just the injury stuff. So in the game on Friday, Desmond Bane twisted his ankle badly, and it was almost a comedy. I mean, it's a tragic comedy of how the Grizzlies season is going, because you had this successive games where you lose Ja Morant, you lose Marcus Smart, you lose Desmond Bane, you lose Jake LaRavia the next night. Poor Jake didn't make the injury graphic they put up during the MLK Day game. They're talking about all the Grizzlies players who are out. But it was just about a week ago where the Grizzlies had beaten the Suns, and we were feeling pretty good. The night before, we'd beaten the Lakers. Ja Morant, or the game before, we'd beaten the Lakers. Ja Morant was amazing in that game. He misses the Suns game with his sore shoulder, but the rest of the Grizzlies step up to beat the Suns. And then it was on Monday, last Monday, we found out that, oh my goodness, Ja Morant is out for the season. So that came out on January 8th. And then the next game, the Grizzlies wrap up that road trip 3-0 by beating the Mavericks. But Marcus Smart dislocates his finger in that game, and they announce the next day or 2 days later that he's out for 6 weeks. He's going to be reevaluated after 6 weeks. So they announced that on January 11th. Then, of course, the Bane injury happened the next day. They made the medical announcement for his prognosis and recovery time. They announced that on January 14th. And we found out that he would be out for a minimum of 6 weeks. So the injury news PR reports came out. Ja's was January 8th, Marcus Smart's was January 11th, and then Desmond Bane's was January 14th, also Jake LaRavia's on January 14th. So in a span of 6 days, we and the Grizzlies franchise lost Ja Morant for the season and found out that Marcus Smart and Desmond Bane would be gone for a minimum of 6 weeks. And that, dear friend, ended the season. I know we're going to have our handful of inspiring, fun victories like the kind we got against the Warriors on Monday. But that ended the season. There's going to be no miracle run towards the play-in. The miracle run towards the play-in was going to be with Ja Morant, and at the very least was going to be with Marcus Smart and Desmond Bane. Now that they're all gone, it ain't happening, folks. And so now you basically focus this season even more than ever on setting yourselves up for next year and evaluating the rest of the roster. Now, the fun part of it is, oh my goodness, Vince Williams Jr. has been awesome for 2 months now, and now Gigi Jackson has burst on the scene. More on that in a second. But the Grizzlies' injuries mean essentially they're super shorthanded. Of course, they get to add guys on 10-day contracts because they're going to get these roster hardship exceptions because of all the players they have injured. You can apply for a hardship exception, this is my understanding, when you have 4 guys out who have missed a minimum of 3 games and project to be out for 2 more weeks. Well, the Grizzlies clear that easily. They have Ja and Steven Adams out for the season. And then you have Brandon Clark, who's still kind of, it's nebulous when he's coming back, but he's out. And then you throw in Desmond Bane, you throw in Marcus Smart. They've got plenty. So they could actually add multiple. At least my understanding is they could add, 2 to 3 10-day contract guys, although maybe they're not going to get one for Brandon Clark. I'm not totally sure on that. But the Grizzlies right now are super shorthanded, and when you include LaRavia, you're going to have a lot of roster turnover, and you'll keep adding, bigs here, maybe a shooter there, as they fill out the roster. Now, the overall timeline, just looking at it for the schedule and the dates when these players are going to be reevaluated and come back. Like Jake LaRavia out for a minimum of 3 weeks. I mean, bad luck for Jake. Jake had a strong game off the bench on Friday against the Clippers. Maybe the best he's looked. Shot the ball with confidence, made a couple of threes. He scored 12 points in 20 minutes. And then because of all the injuries, of course, he'd gotten this opportunity to play, but then the next game turns his ankle. So LaRavia's out. He's going to miss at least the next 10 games. The 3-week reevaluation, if it's based on the date that the press release went out, means on February 4th, LaRavia will get reevaluated. Next up will be February 22nd. This will be right after the All-Star break ends. Marcus Smart will be reevaluated. That is going to be, it looks like a minimum of 16 games. We can cross our fingers that once the All-Star break is over, that means Marcus Smart should be back. Of course, reevaluated after 6 weeks does not guarantee he will return after 6 weeks. And then a few days after that, of course, Desmond Bane is supposed to be reevaluated. That would be February 25th if the 6 weeks match up exactly of when the injury report was released. That means Bane will miss likely at least the next 18 games. And this is just, I mean, yes, it's devastating for the Grizzlies. On the win-loss column, very obviously bad to lose Desmond Bane while you already don't have Ja Morant. But, like, Desmond Bane had an outside shot at making the All-Star game, and I didn't think he was going to. But an outside shot, he's deserving. And if there were injury replacements, he had a chance to be there. Also, though, if he didn't make the All-Star game, there's a great probability that he could have been included in the 3-point shootout. And also, the All-Star game being in Indianapolis, when he's from Indiana, it would have been an opportunity, I think a good chance for Desmond Bane to participate in All-Star Saturday night in his home state. And that's just sad. It's sad to me that he's probably going to miss that. I mean, I was thinking to myself, is it possible, 5 weeks from now that he's able to run around and do the shooting? I mean, maybe, but it obviously is far from ideal. It's disappointing that whatever remote chance existed for Bane to participate in All-Star Weekend is gone. So that's the injury update coming up. Of course, there are no timelines for Derrick Rose. Like Derrick Rose, I haven't even mentioned yet as far as being injured. He's not available. His week-to-week thing, I don't know how we're supposed to work with that. So maybe at some point, Derrick Rose will be back. So this season, essentially over. The Grizzlies will be extremely shorthanded for the short term, borderline long term. I mean, 6 weeks is no short chunk of an NBA season. Like I said, it's like 15 to 18 games, depending on some of these guys' absences. But the promising thing was how G.G. Jackson has stepped up and Vince Williams Jr. stepped up. This win over the Warriors, absolute incredible balm for the soul for us suffering and hurting Grizzlies fans. You had fourth quarter lineups that primarily depended on guys who had played for the hustle and or were two-way players. You had Jacob Gilyard, G.G. Jackson, current two-way players, playing the entire fourth quarter. You had Vince Williams Jr., who was on a two-way contract as of a week ago, playing the entire fourth quarter. And they outplay Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, Draymond Green, our rivals, the Golden State Warriors. And there was a lot of this game where I was specifically noting, like, these two teams are struggling. The lineups they're putting on the court, like, the Warriors are playing Lester Quinones, former Memphis player. Somehow he's in the game over Moses Moody. You had this guy, Trace Jackson Davis, playing a lot. I mean, Corey Joseph's on the court, and meanwhile the Grizzlies are playing, not their first choice of players by any stretch of the imagination. You got like these Roddy, Gilyard, Jackson, Kennard last. Kennard has been starting games, so the Grizzlies had to start Luke Kennard, Vince Williams Jr., Zaire Williams, Jaren Jackson Jr., and Xavier Tillman. But despite it all, the Grizzlies were competing. They were hanging in there. They were down by a few points, down by like 7 near the end of the third quarter. But then all of a sudden, they put together this fourth quarter run, and you have everyone making huge plays. Vince Williams Jr. had an amazing game, had a career high 24 points. He had 7 rebounds, 4 assists, 2 steals, a block. He guarded Steph Curry the entire game. He seemed to take maniacal joy from trying to stop Steph Curry. Steph Curry had a couple of weird turnovers, but I will just go ahead and credit Vince Williams Jr. for forcing those. Vince Williams Jr., who I adore, who I've been raving about basically for, a year. Since Summer League and ever since he actually burst onto the scene this regular season, I'm so enamored, and he keeps, honestly, surprising me with how consistent and how good he has been. He was awesome against the Knicks. Had that career-high 8 assists, had 17 points, 8 rebounds, 8 assists against the Knicks. In that Knicks game, he had to guard Julius Randle. He's guarding Julius Randle. He's forcing multiple offensive fouls by frustrating Julius Randle. He goes from guarding Julius Randle and being your essential point guard on offense to the next game guarding Steph Curry, also being your point guard, and also leading the team with 24 points. It's amazing what Vince Williams Jr. is doing. So incredible games from Vince Williams Jr., who keeps growing in, confidence, and the role that they're giving him has total, complete trust, it seems like. Taylor Jenkins believes in Vince Williams Jr., more than any bench or role player he's ever had. I think he might believe in him more than Grayson Allen. It's been amazing to watch. It has been the bright spot of this season. Now, right next to him, for bright spots of the last week, though, it's G.G. Jackson, the youngest player in the NBA. G.G. Jackson erupted for 20 points against the Knicks, hit a bunch of threes. He comes out against the Warriors, follows it up with 23 points. Also, 6 rebounds. Also, 2 steals, 2 blocks. The guy's getting stocks all over the place. He's defending. He's rebounding. He's taller than Xavier Tillman. There's a lot of people on social media who are always like, G.G. Jackson's a baller. It's wild we don't play him. And I'm always like, I don't think that's the case. I saw him play at Summer League, and he just seemed like a young kid. Seemed like he had great physical attributes, of course. We know he has the measurables. Whether or not he can help you on a basketball court, I don't know. He seemed lost to like swing the ball in Summer League. Every time the ball came to him, it stuck. He made a bunch of turnovers. It's like, yeah, that guy's got to marinate. That guy's got to figure it out. Well, I don't know who was right. Sounds like the people who were just clamoring that, hey, G.G. Jackson's better than all our other players, needs to play. After the last 2 games, I have a sympathetic ear to what you were saying. G.G. Jackson was incredible. And him making these huge plays in winning basketball, like this is not him racking up a bunch of points in an end of April game where he's playing like 40 minutes. This is not him having the Zaire Williams 24.9 assist game against the Thunder on the last regular season game last year. I mean, it's related because we're so shorthanded that guys have to play. But no, you're winning a basketball game. He's coming off the bench and he's sticking on the court because the Grizzlies need to win. He's taking the playing time from other guys who were depended on. And now he has consecutive games with at least 20 points. I'm sure you've seen this stat already. He's the second youngest NBA player ever to have consecutive games scoring at least 20 points. LeBron James is the youngest. The 3 youngest players in NBA history to have consecutive games with at least 20 points, it's Gigi, LeBron James, and Kevin Durant. G.G. Jackson was asked about that stat. He just said he tries to stay humble. And he also, I think correctly, wisely said, both LeBron and KD, those guys have more developed offensive games at that point. Yeah, I'm glad he knows he's not that good. But we can just feel joy, I think, about the way G.G. Jackson played. I mean, he finished this game with 5 made threes. He had 2 in the fourth quarter that were huge shots. Tough shots. And I don't know how much of it is that he's just kind of out over his skis and this is just a random blip. But it's super encouraging. And for this Grizzlies team dealing with all these catastrophic injuries and obviously dealing with, some roster decisions over the past couple of years that made their depth much worse. And now you're going into next year and you're worried about the luxury tax and you're thinking who are going to be the complementary pieces, who are going to be our starters on the wing. And now all of a sudden you have G.G. Jackson, 19-year-old looking incredibly promising. And you have Vince Williams Jr., who's locked up for the next 3 years after this one. And those guys look like, hey, maybe perfect complementary pieces. At worst, perfect complementary pieces. Now, I also want to recognize Jacob Gilyard, a guy who I've said, maybe it's time to move on. Maybe we got to find somebody else who can play point guard. Jacob Gilyard made massive swing plays in this fourth quarter. He hit threes in the game, but the fourth quarter, he picked Steph Curry's pocket, got that breakaway layup where he got the steal. He then stole the ball from Kuminga on a post-up and ends up feeding Luke Kennard for a big 3 that put the Grizzlies up, I think, 10 at that point. Also, the Grizzlies did most of this damage. Their big fourth quarter was without getting many contributions from Jaren Jackson Jr. Jaren Jackson Jr. was out of the fourth quarter for a lot of this run. And by the time he checked back in, yeah, he contributed. He blocked a shot. He made a big, important driving layup. But Jaren was just 4 out of 20 from the field. He was 3 out of 14 from the three-point line. He did have 5 assists. Great to see again. Tied a season high with 4 steals, got a block. So Jaren contributed. But this game, so much of it, it's just about Gilyard and then, of course, Vince Williams Jr. and G.G. Jackson. Now, a little bit more on G.G. Jackson. I think one of the most encouraging things, like the three-point shooting, yeah, it's great. It's what we hope for. The stroke looks good. He's making free throws. That's good. But like that might go away. I don't know how much of that is true and going to stick around. Obviously, he's not going to make the same percentage he made these last 2 games. But the other things that I find so encouraging, it's the defensive plays. And it's the fact that he can drive towards the basket. He can get to the rim. Gigi can get to the rim. Gigi can get to the foul line. Having a guy with his size who could just be an average three-point shooter, I mean, maybe he's above average, but just be an average three-point shooter, but also be able to get to the rim and defend and rebound. I mean, it's sort of the holy grail. That's what you hope for. And we were having a conversation in my Grits and Grinds Slack channel as part of my Patreon, just about how do we view the last few years of roster building and draft day moves with the consideration now that you might have hit on Gigi Jackson and you hit on Vince Williams Jr. Like, we can gnash our teeth about the trade for Roddy and taking Jake LaRavia and drafting Kennedy Chandler, but those misses, or things that appear to be misses so far, when you look in the context of, well, we had two hits. We got Vince Williams Jr. at 45 and Gigi Jackson at 45. There's a good chance in a couple of years, if you just imagine hey, that 2022 draft, just imagine we took Vince Williams Jr. with the 19th pick. And you feel a lot better. And if Gigi Jackson can continue this impact on winning, and the fact that he's as young as, if not younger, than so many guys in this upcoming draft, that could be a huge draft day victory for the Grizzlies. I've seen some draft experts, I don't know how serious they are, just talking about how Gigi Jackson, he'd be a top 10 pick in this year's draft. Now throw in the fact that the Grizzlies are also going to get another top 10 pick in this year's draft. Well, all of a sudden, we start to see that silver lining for this terrible season start to emerge. And also, Gigi gave us those delightful post-game moments. If you were watching the TNT broadcast, he was starstruck and just delighted and had wonder that he got to speak with Shaq. I mean, it was heartwarming. You could tell the thrill it was for him. And then apparently in the post-game, he's so young. And he showed, I feel like, that youth in a really enchanting way. So that was cool to see for the Grizzlies in that win. Anyways, let's go over a little bit more of the last 3 games, and then we'll talk about the Grizzlies adding Scotty Pippen Jr. on a 2-way contract. We'll do that right after this short break. Hey there, Grits and Grinds listeners. I'm just telling you once again about Underdog Fantasy. If you want to play daily fantasy for cash, if you want to play in private drafts with your friends, if you want to do season-long best ball, if you want to participate in higher or lowers against the statistical projections for individual players, you can do all of that at Underdog Fantasy. And if you sign up now using my promo code FBBF or by clicking the link in this episode's description, Underdog will match your opening deposit up to $100. Give Underdog a try. Use that promo code FBBF or click the link in this episode's description. All right, the Friday night game against the Clippers. They did not have Santi Aldama. They started Desmond Bane, Luke Kennard, Vince Williams Jr., Jared Jackson Jr., and Xavier Tillman. This game, obviously, you lose Bane in the third quarter, and that really took the wind out of the sails. And honestly, you were getting kind of kicked around pretty bad in the second quarter. The Clippers scored 42 points in the second quarter. But despite that, this game I thought featured some of the best ball movement of the entire season. I was really enjoying how the Grizzlies were playing offense in this one. The ball was whipping around. I was really impressed. And some of it is shooting variance, the shots were going in. Xavier Tillman had a really strong game in this one. His immediate renaissance with no Biombo around continued. He tied his career high with 20 points. He had 9 rebounds, 2 assists, 2 blocks. But the ball was whipping around. The team recorded 30 assists. This was one of those rare games where the Grizzlies got 30 assists and lost. It was just the 4th defeat in the last 3 seasons where they recorded a minimum of 30 assists. They made 18 3-pointers. They were 18 out of 44. So that's 40.9%. You made 40% of your three-pointers with 44 attempts and had 30 assists. Historically, those are usually automatic wins for the Grizzlies, but not against this Clippers attack and not, I guess, with these Grizzlies lineups. The Grizzlies, by the way, 33-4 over the last 3 seasons when they record at least 30 assists. Jaren struggled a bit in this one, 6 out of 20 from the field, had 21 points. Vince, maybe his toughest game in a long time, although, again, he had to guard Kawhi and Paul George literally every second. G.G. Jackson got in there, and this was before his breakout. G.G. Jackson, what an eye-opener. You're now guarding Kawhi Leonard. Good luck, buddy. So I thought the Grizzlies played well and still got blown out. And I guess I'm not going to be super worried about that. Like, Roddy had a fine game, maybe one of his stronger games off the bench. I already told you, like, LaRavia looked good in that one. Kennard had 11 points and 6 assists. Now, the follow-up game against the Knicks, this was we're getting exhilarated with how Vince Williams Jr. and G.G. Jackson keep stepping up. The Knicks game was where the Grizzlies were down to 9 guys because of no Jaren, no Santi, and then, of course, LaRavia got hurt. So they were down to 8 guys, and despite that, the Grizzlies led at halftime, and it was all about the joy of, oh my goodness, I can't really believe how bad Vince Williams Jr. and G.G. Jackson have them all messed up. I mean, both of them scored 12 points apiece in the first half. Also, Luke Kennard had 12 points in that first half. Then, of course, the second half happened, and the Grizzlies ran out of steam. They only managed to score 37 points total in the second half. Xavier Tillman also in this one, got to give him a lot of credit. He set a new career high with 6 steals. Tillman's stat line continuing again. The run of really strong games, basically ever since maybe he found out Bismack Biyombo was going to be released. In this one against the Knicks, Tillman had 12 points, 5 rebounds, 5 assists, 6 steals, and a block. He became the first Grizzlies player with 6 steals in the game since Kyle Anderson. He recorded a 4x5. That's having at least 5 in 4 different statistical categories. So he's just the 14th player in the NBA this year to have a 4x5. The last Grizzlies player to record a 4x5 was D'Anthony Melton. Of course, the white whale is the 5x5. Rarely, if barely ever seen performance. But GG stepped up in this one, the 20 points, the 6 rebounds. The Grizzlies had to play so small the whole game. I guess that's kind of the downside. And, the 37-point second half, we might say they ran out of gas. They also ran out of talent, but they finished overall with 94 points as a team. They only made 1 out of their 18 three-pointers in the second half. So that kind of was the story of this one. They snapped their 19-game streak of making at least 10 three-pointers. That had been a franchise record streak. They finished with 9. Again, 8 in the first half, 1 in the second half. I mean, they were still in it. It was 71-69 when Tillman, he got his 6th steal of the game, finished the layup on the fast break, resulting from that steal. But then, the Knicks pulled away basically because the Grizzlies had to play so small they could not rebound. Isaiah Hartenstein had a huge game. The Grizzlies got destroyed on rebounding, gave up a bunch of offensive rebounds. And despite, again, fighting hard and honestly, despite, moving the ball around really, really well once again, they had 17 assists in the first half. They finished with 27 assists. All these numbers are great for the Grizzlies. It just didn't end up in a victory as the Knicks pulled away late. And then, of course, we know what happened next. You had the awesome win over the Warriors. Now, because of all the injury issues, because of Vince Williams Jr. being added to the main roster with his new contract, that meant the Grizzlies actually have space now to add some players. A 2-way spot opened up, and they filled that 2-way spot by signing Scotty Pippen Jr. to a 2-year, 2-way deal. Scotty Pippen Jr., of course, is the son of Scotty Pippen. He played at Vanderbilt. He's a point guard. He is a pretty small point guard. And I think most people initially thought that the Grizzlies needed, a big. And I still think they need a big. But I guess they figured with the talent available and the investment they wanted to make in a two-way spot, which, again, is not that much. It's someone you could basically waive without any problem and just sign somebody else if you want to. But it does make a good bit of sense. I had made my wish list before I found out who they'd signed. And my first wish was, to get a big, maybe someone with like some upside potential. Now, I don't know anything about basically anyone who's not in the NBA. I can't pretend to come up with like, hey, here's the list of bigs in the G League you should go get. I see everyone talking about this guy, Trey Jemison. I don't know anything about him. So this is where I have to trust kind of, what the Grizzlies actually do and their scouting experts. And maybe they thought none of the bigs are really that worth it. They're not going to stick around. Maybe the idea of Scotty Pippen Jr. being a long-term fit or a long-term helper makes a little bit more sense. Maybe they move on from Jacob Gilyard after this. I don't know. Or maybe next season they move on from Jacob Gilyard. But bringing in Pippen to be a ball handler makes sense because on my wish list, my first wish list was a center. My second thing on my wish list was like, we got to get ball handling. Just any point guard. Someone who can play point guard for at least the next 6 weeks when there's no Marcus Smart and Desmond Bane. That's what I want. I mean, I love that Vince Williams Jr. has basically become the starting point guard, but we need a dribbler. So that helps here. So it wasn't like a shocking move to get a point guard. Of course, we need ball handling. So Scotty Pippen Jr. is going to fill that role for the Grizzlies. My other thing on my wish list, so I said big first, second, ball handling third. Literally any shooter, preferably one with size. The guys I have in mind, I know the Pelicans picked up Matt Ryan, who's a big shooter. Look at what Sam Merrill is doing right now for the Cavaliers. He's on an incredible run. There's been shooters, you call it, from the G League who break through and stick. Like Garrison Matthews is like a fringe NBA player playing for the Hawks now. I don't know who those guys are in the G League right now, but that's who I'm looking for. So the two-way spot might be filled, but they're going to be able to use these 10-day contracts because of the hardship exceptions and check some guys out. And so that's who I'll be looking for them to add soon. Not specific players, because unfortunately, I don't know enough about NBA scouting and the G League rosters and the people not in the NBA to tell you who to get. But I want a big, and also this team could always use more shooting. Wrapping up, two random stats that I have noticed that are worth mentioning, I thought. After losing that Friday, Saturday night back-to-back against the Knicks and Clippers, that meant the Grizzlies dropped to 0-7 at home this season on Fridays or Saturdays. Remember, last season, on Fridays or Saturdays at home, they were 13-0. 13-0 last season on Fridays and Saturdays, 0-7 on Fridays or Saturdays this season. And last thing, the Grizzlies have drawn 29 charges this season. That is already more charges than they drew last season. That is already the most charges drawn in any season under Taylor Jenkins. Last year they drew 26. They've already drawn 29 this year. They are 6th in the NBA in drawn charges per game. So the Marcus Smart trade working out as far as the team has learned how to draw charges. Even when Marcus Smart isn't playing, they draw charges now. By the way, Marcus Smart actually leads the team, or he's tied for the team lead with drawn charges with 6, tied with Desmond Bane. And that is all for this episode. Thanks as always for listening. The Grizzlies are back at it on Thursday night, playing the Minnesota Timberwolves. So a tough matchup there. As always, appreciate you guys who support the program over at patreon.com/fastbreakbreakfast. Also, thanks to everybody who just listens or watches on YouTube. Hope you guys have a great, warm Wednesday. I'll talk to you soon. Go Grizz.